So today we're taking a look at the Norfolk Southern AC44C6M, which was converted from DC to AC power, and these were rebuilds of Dash 9s. And this one comes with a pretty cool livery because it's the prototype with this blue cab in the front, and on the side we have these flames coming out, which are actually supposed to be a horse mane, because Norfolk Southern's logo is a horse, and this livery is nicknamed the Sonic Bonnet or Blue Mane. I think it's a lot cooler to look at than your typical Norfolk Southern locomotive, which is just painted black. This livery is a lot more vibrant. But anyways, let's get started here in the front. So you can see it has a typical wide cab design, but before the rebuild, it was using a standard cab. So on top we have the number boards 4000, the twin headlights, windshield wipers, a bunch of grab irons, and sand filler hatches. And there's also a cab interior with an event recorder camera, and a control stand for the engineer. Sorry, it's kind of hard to see. The side cab windows are tinted, and there's 3 black chairs for the engineer, conductor, and brakeman in the middle. And then in the nose we have this empty headlight slot because Norfolk Southern likes to have them mounted on top. Then we got the Norfolk Southern Thoroughbred horse logo with the iconic white stripes. Then we have a grab iron ladder on the left, some more on the sides. And then in the very front we have some stanchions with ditch lights, which if you look closely there is a little writing here, says 74 volt bulb. Also says dummy on the MU cable receptacles, which connect to the MU cable. And it's interesting, they're using a different design for the chain so there's no hole, although they didn't paint it all the way. And there's a warning on the back, as well as some labels on the sides. Then we have the MU hoses, and a train line hose in the middle with that loop. And here is the ScaleTrains metal knuckle coupler. Then we have this coupler cut lever, although it is bowing on the end. And then on the side we have the step well, painted yellow edges, and it says watch your step. We also got the F for front, a brake pipe cutout, toilet drain, and it's equipped with spotter control, whatever that is. And on top there's a little label for sand fill. Then on the side of the cab we have the sunshade on top, and a pair of wind deflectors. It is interesting, there's a small mirror at the bottom of both of them. Then we have the road number 4000, and this orange light is the locomotive speed limiter or LSL. It activates when you're going excessive speed. Then down here it says DC to AC with the sine wave. It's a really cool graphic, as well as an NS patch. Then we have a cab vent and the air conditioner. And then if we go down here, we have the GE high-ad truck. Check out all this molding, got wires going along the top, and the wheels are painted in this rust brown color. We also got some sand lines in the front, as well as in the rear, and it even goes at the very top. See, they're actually not connected, so it's actually an illusion. Now one thing I just realized is that there's actually these holes in the middle of the truck, where you can see part of the wheel, so that is pretty cool. And on top we have a jacking pad. So the DC to AC conversion actually happens in this box, which is an AC inverter cabinet, and they generate AC power for the motors. You can see some X panels, and again the lines for the horse mane. Then on top we have the dynamic brake vents, some grab irons to go up to the roof, and another ladder on the side. Then we have the central air intake, and this extruded panel underneath, and these tiny lift rings that stick out. Alright, and then on the bottom we have the fuel tank, which has a steel belt mounted in the front. Then we got some more details, the emergency fuel trip, the fuel fill, and some kind of label with a snowman. Apparently it's to check ice or snow during the winter. And here is a digital fuel gauge, which actually looks pretty accurate with the red numbers. And then here are the regular fuel gauges. Looks like it has a full tank of diesel. Then in the middle of the locomotive, we have the Norfolk Southern horse logo. There's also a lot of these door panels, and some tiny labels, the lube oil dipstick inside, and the fuel filter drain valve. It's pretty legible. And on the sill is an AEI tag. And I guess this is the lube oil drain. And then in the rear we have the radiator section, which you can see inside because it's see-through etched metal. There also are some more labels. And in the center we have the handbrake. I really like how they did the controls, it looks really realistic. Then if we go to the bottom, here's the rear truck. This one is different because it has that brake chain at the top, which is split in half, and in real life it will connect to the handbrake. And there's also a drain in the back of the fuel tank. Now I do have to mention that one issue with this truck, if you look at this sanding line, when I rotate it, it kind of strikes it at the top. It makes a little clicking sound. But if I go to the front bogie, I don't have that issue at all. This side also has a bunch of this underside plumbing. Then here's the rear step well, which has one less step than the front. And by the way, the steps are see-through. Alright, now let's go take a look at the back. Alright, so here at the top, we have the headlights, sand filler hatch, and road numbers painted on. And we got the grab iron ladder on the left, and the rear ditch lights. There's a lot of the same detail in the front, although the train line hose is a bit too low and touches the ground. There also is a pair of spare knuckle coupler holders, and some tiny grab irons at the bottom. And there's an angled out anti-climber, and the stanchions make this jutting out shape, which I think is a bit weird. Alright, now let's take a look at the other side. So if you look here at the end, there is a ton of labels. on the sill, and I don't know what this one is, and some more warning labels on the radiator, fire extinguisher inside, and at the bottom we have an air dryer filter, and at the top there's the cooling water hatch. Then we have these two air reservoir tanks with some pipes in between, some more fuel tank detail, and for this side the S on the Norfolk Southern logo has a bit of bleeding. Normally it should look like this. Then on top we have some additional vents, which they have see-through grills with fans inside, although there is some excess paint on this vent. Then we have an access door here, and this battery step-up, which leads to the cab door, as well as a small side view mirror for the engineer. Then in this nook we have this spitter valve, and then here is the front truck, does have this hook sticking out. In the front we have the two flag holders. Then on the side we have these two big vents, as well as the GE builder's plate. So that's it for the side. Now let's go take a look at the roof section. Alright, so on top of the cab we have the PTC antenna farm, which is pretty much all painted blue except these two black dots, but it looks pretty spot on. Then we have these rooftop panels, which are separately applied, and there are some hatches above the battery box. And then we have this bracket here, which is a bit weird. It does make a little indent here, which I've never really seen this before in a locomotive. I think it's unique to the C6M. Then in the middle we have a Nathan Air Chime P5 horn with some covers on it. Then we got the exhaust stack, which is black inside, and it is a real hole. Then we have the radiator section with etched metal grates. There also is some walkway treading on the end and in the front as well. Not so much on the inverter cabinet though. Now let's go check out the bottom. So here on the end, if you look closely, they have diagonal support beams, which is a nice little detail. I know they didn't always have it like that. And here's the motion of the truck, the fuel tank with some seam lines, and the other end. Alright, so here I brought in my ScaleTrains Norfolk Southern GEVO ES44AC, and this is the typical black and white Norfolk Southern livery that you'll see on most trains, unlike this one which has a blue cab, so it really stands out. Now for the differences, they actually look very similar. You see they both don't have a nose-mounted headlight because Norfolk Southern likes to have it on top. Now the GEVO is actually an older ScaleTrains model, so if you look at the knuckle couplers, they're pretty much the same design, but the new one you can see it's a lot glossier. Compared to the old one, it's kind of dull. And if you look at the MU cable, you can see the chain that attaches is a different style. The newer version doesn't have a hole, but it does look thinner, made more proportional. Now for the sides, they're pretty similar, but on the C6M, if you look at the wind deflectors, they have these tiny mirrors at the bottom, but on the GEVO, they go all the way up. They also painted the LSL light pretty neatly, while on the older model, it's a bit sloppy and just goes through like this. The C6M is also using this older steel bell, while the GEVO uses a newer modern electronic E-bell. And on the C6M, they have better detailed digital fuel gauge. In the past, ScaleTrains would just leave this black, and I didn't really know what it was, honestly. Now the cab roofs are pretty different. The C6M has this newer style PTC antenna farm, while the GEVO has this older style with the GPS dome, which the rear one has since been modernized. Now the big way to tell between these two is the rear. So the ES44 GEVO has this classic boxy front, then a wedge in the rear, while the C6M is all uniform. And interesting, the exhaust stacks also have a different style. GEVO is a lot more boxy with this little thing inside. And then for the rear, they both have ditch lights, classic Norfolk Southern. And it's interesting the headlights are side to side while this one's vertical. It looks like they have different placement for the sand filler hatches. Alright, so here is the original Dash 9 that the C6Ms were built from, although this one does have a wide nose. And they wanted to make it more like an AC4400. And this is an Athearn model, while this is ScaleTrains. So this is basically this converted to make it more like this. So it's kind of like a hybrid between these two. So for the front, they look generally the same. Just Norfolk Southern has that weird top-mounted headlight, because normally it's usually in the nose. So the C6M is a DC to AC. So the original Dash 9 was running on DC power. So the cabinet behind the cab is very small, where it has the air conditioner. You can see that vent right there. Also, if you look at the top, it only has 2 dynamic brake vents, while on the AC4400 they have this big AC inverter cabinet and 3 dynamic brake vents, and they also move the air conditioner vent under the cab. So during the conversion they pretty much match the AC4400. Now all 3 of them have different sizes of central air intakes. You can see it's really long on the Dash 9, a bit smaller on the AC44, and practically a square on the C6M. And that's how I could tell it's pretty modern. So if I bring back the GEVO, you can see it does have that same modern square shaped vent. Now the C6M has this weird bracket that sticks out, which you won't really find on all these other locomotives, so that is a good spotting feature. Now for the radiators, they're all pretty much the same, even on the side with these 4 squares. It's the same on the AC44 and the Dash 9, but it's totally different on the GEVO. And now if you look at the rear, you can see these older locomotives have these vertical headlights while it's side to side on the GEVO. Also, the sand filler hatch on the C6M is mounted on top, just like the original Dash 9, while the AC44 is in the middle, just like the GEVO. And here again, you can see Norfolk Southern's kind of quirky with these ditch lights in the rear. The other Class 1 railroads, CSX, BNSF, they don't do that. So I also picked up the ScaleTrains 82-foot Reefer. So it has a pretty cool design. In the front we have the refrigerator unit and keeps the interior of the car cool, so that's why we have these icicles at the top. And inside they would transport fruits, vegetables, meats, and frozen foods. But yeah, let's get started here in the front. Alright, so here on the end we have the refrigerator unit, which is manufactured by Carrier, and apparently this model is an Ultima 53. It is an excess height car, satellite controlled unit, so these are controlled remotely. There is a website listed, although I can't really read it. And on top, this must be where they have the radio receiver. And in the bottom corner, they have an emergency kill switch and this black box which does light up if you get the sound version. Then we got the car number TILX and this blue band because it's an excess height car. And then on the end, we have this platform, which I did find interesting that on top it's actually see-through etched metal grates. It also makes a C shape. I was kind of expecting it to be more boxy. Then we have some white handrails, a grab iron ladder, some more here in the front, and a stirrups up hanging below. Pretty much the same thing on the other side, and there is a fuel tank with the 3 points of contact label, and I think this is supposed to be the fuel gauge. And this fuel is used to power the refrigerator, which they are using diesel fuel. And some more writing here. And they have a die-cast metal knuckle coupler, which has a bottom shelf. There also is a train line hose, some wires wrapped around, and a coupler cut lever. And they also have a tack board. Alright, now for the profile view. You can see this car has an interesting pattern with these white patches along the bottom, because these are ex-BNSF cars. And I love the way it looks. It's not uniform, so it gives a bit more character. And all across the bottom we have these yellow FRA conspicuity stripes. And the top has these icicle mountains again, which is a holdover from the BNSF car. I also found it interesting that there's a small groove running along the roof as well. There also are seam lines running along the walls, and they are extruded. Alright, so on the end of the car we have the car number, the capacity, and RP for mechanical refrigerator, as opposed to ice boxes like in the old days. But down here we have some more labels, as excess height, stuff about side bearings and brake shoes, and here's the jacking pad, with the truck at the bottom, which is fairly detailed, with a car number stencil, and some molded-in writing. And it comes with rotating bearing caps, which is pretty realistic. There also is a bit of air brake detail with this line going along the bottom. And these horizontal strips, which I'm not sure what that's about, but there's two of them. And then in the middle it says it's a plate F loading gauge, tack board underneath, and some more molded in details. Also the bottom edge has a little taper to it, as well as these stirrup steps, they are angled. Then there's a small L because it's the left side, and it has a 50k capacity, and here's a grab iron. There also is a stirrup step on the bottom. And then we reach the door. Close and lock door before moving car. Secure both halves before moving car. You know, it's the first time I came across this word. And these rails are separately applied pieces. And check out all this rivet detail. And then down here we have the door latch, which is a separately applied piece, as well as these rods. Check out all this printing, very legible. Even this one down here. Do not open or close doors with forklift. They also have these rollers that run along the rails at the bottom. And the cool thing is, it's actually a separate piece, so you can see the holes inside. There also is another railing here at the top. They also come with little bumpers molded in for door stoppers. Alright, and then on the other end, we got the AEI tag and the other truck. Also the COT stencil, some more dimensions, and a ladder with a stirrup step. Alright, so on this face, we got that blue stripe at the top again, where TILX is patched out. And some more of that writing. Then at the bottom we have the handbrake wheel, chain going down the platform, which is made of see-through etched metal. There also are a pair of ladders and a tack board. Alright, now for the right side, which does have that R. It looks pretty similar, but if you go here at the corner, there is a defect card holder. So if there's any issues, they can attach a form here. And in the middle, there is a brake cylinder release rod. But other than that, I think it's about the same. Alright, now let's go check out the roof. So here's how it looks like. In the front we got that platform we saw earlier, and the rest is pretty smooth, not much going on. But around the perimeter there are these tiny rivets. And around the doorway there's like 3 here, then 1, so they're not equidistant, seems like they're purposely placed. Alright, so now let's go check out the underside. So over here in the edge we have that train line hose, very nicely detailed. See the bottom of the fuel tank, and I like that they added these little rivets. And then we have the truck, and it's interesting that there's a circular indent around it. And we also have this hanging bit. I think it's a lever mechanism for the brakes, which this car has the full air brake system. Looks very realistic, and I like that it's very thin and fine. There also is this hole here, which if you get the sound version, there will be a button to adjust the sounds. And here you can see the stirrup steps, which I found out they're actually attached to these poles under the floor instead of the sidewall. And then here's a look at the B end. Alright, so I brought in my Atlas Tropicana Reefer, and actually didn't know that Reefers come in different sizes. The Atlas one is a 64 footer, while the ScaleTrains is much longer at 82 feet. Also, if you compare the roofs, the Atlas one does have these ridges on top, while ScaleTrains is just completely smooth. It looks like the brake beam randomly fell off, which they should go in here, it's just a push fit. So it looks like this. And speaking of brake beams, the Atlas one does not include that, so it is less detailed. Another thing, Atlas does not have rotating bearing caps, which ScaleTrains does. So here on the end, you can see they both have these carrier air conditioners, although I think they have a slightly different style. I can see this is where I got confused because this one is curved, but on the original Atlas one, it was all straight. And they do have this etched metal walkway, while on ScaleTrains, it's more like grates. Maybe it is a more modern design. And then on the side, you can see there is a bit of underside detail, but if you compare it to ScaleTrains, the details are lower and I don't have to tilt the car to see them. It is a lot more realistic. I also found it amusing that this one carries 50k, while Tropicana has exactly half that amount. Also, if you look at the stirrup step on the Atlas model, it is kind of thick, and that's because they actually molded it into the shell itself, so it is not a separate piece. Compare that with ScaleTrains, it's much thinner, because they attach it to the floor instead, and it's also painted black, which is a more accurate color. Even for the Tropicana, it's not supposed to be white. And then for the door, it has some details here which seem to be accurate, and the latches are separately applied pieces, but the bottom railing is just one big piece. There are no holes like on the ScaleTrains model, which also made these rods separate pieces instead of being molded in. Now if you compare the bottoms, the ScaleTrains does have a lot thinner parts, very fine, and there's a lot of depth to it, while on Atlas everything's a bit chunkier. It's decent, but not on the same level. And now if you compare the B ends, it's actually not that bad. Atlas does have this pretty thin handbrake and grab irons, but the platform they're using is kinda eh. There are holes, but it doesn't feel as sharp as etched metal, like on the ScaleTrains, which is more shiny. Also, Atlas doesn't paint the tip of the trainline hose, while ScaleTrains has a silver tip. So these cars are very different. So Kato recently released these new Unitrack. See, this is the large radius curve with 63 inches. Well, my largest one is 31 inches, so yeah, it's actually an insane amount. And you can use this to make a subtle S-curve with 2 of them. So you get 4 of them in a pack. So this is Kato's largest ever curved Unitrack, turning just 11 degrees, so the curve is very gentle and subtle. So now you can join 2 of them to make this S, and it's pretty great if you have something just a little bit to the left. I think this will be pretty helpful in a layout. So if I bring out my former largest radius curve, the 31 inch, it has this very sharp curve. In comparison, this thing looks relatively straightish, which if I bring in actual straight track, this is how it compares. So this is a nice in-between. So yeah, you can see it is straightish, but it's on a subtle curve. Hopefully it doesn't derail, and we're going to test to see how it does on the layout. So if you look in the back, you can see that train line hose, that's what's causing the sound. Not good for a super elevated track. So I'm gonna give it a trim. So for my final thoughts, the ScaleTrains Norfolk Southern AC44C6M, it's definitely a beautiful looking locomotive. I love the blue Sonic bonnet livery. I was surprised when it was first announced because it's the first time ever produced in HO scale and it's kinda niche, but you can tell there's some little differences between this one and the AC4400, the Dash 9, and the GEVO. As always, ScaleTrains has that peak detail. Lots of these tiny labels have legible text, the trucks have great molding, brown rust painted wheels, sanding lines, and looks like they have that new thinner chain design for the MU cable. And then for the cons, there was a little bit of bleeding on the NS logo on one side and the rear train line hose was touching the ground, but I just fixed it by trimming a bit off. And then for the 82-foot mechanical reefer, it's a great essential piece of rolling stock. Honestly, I wasn't expecting too much since I already had that Atlas reefer, but it turns out there's actually a lot of differences. Even the end hand railing, the roof, the length is totally different. It also rolls pretty well, almost like butter. It's a pretty realistic model. I love how you can see the underside plumbing from the side, and then I got the patch version, so it just gives it great character and it's not mundane. Overall, I like it a lot. And lastly, for the Kato 63-inch radius curve Unitrack, I recently realized I could add more curves in my layout than having just plain oval loop, so I got these. They are really wide and gradual. It's more realistic with the sweeping radius. You can even put two opposite curves together without derailing a train, which is what happened to me in the past. So definitely, if you're using Kato Unitrack, these are pretty handy. But yeah, let me know in the comment section what you guys think. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe to be notified of new videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.